A black father stands before a judge who openly mocks his custody plea. Then, a glimpse of metal on his chest silences the entire courtroom. What happens next will leave you speechless. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment on where you're watching from. Let's get started. The leather soles of Judge Whitmore's shoes clicked against the polished floor as he strode into courtroom 2B, black robes swaying with each deliberate step. The moment he settled behind the high mahogany bench, everyone present could sense the tension tightening. Among the rows of neatly dressed lawyers and anxious relatives stood a tall, broad-shouldered black father named Damian Carter, doing his best to keep his composure. Today would decide whether he retained custody of his 10-year-old daughter, Anaya, a child he had raised since birth, through personal trials and triumphs that few in the room could imagine. Despite his impeccable record as a parent, Damian found himself in a precarious position. The petition to strip him of custody had come from Anaya's maternal grandparents, who insisted he was unfit. Their argument hinged on incidents from years ago: a few late mortgage payments, a scuffle with a neighbor, rumors about his temper when life's pressures mounted. Damian's ex-partner, who struggled with illness and moved out of state, was not present. She had signed over her parental rights years earlier, trusting Damian to care for Anaya full-time. Now those who distrusted him had woven a narrative that painted him as irresponsible and volatile. In the hush of the courtroom, the opposing attorney, Sandra Mills, rose in a tailored gray suit. She cleared her throat, glancing pointedly at the judge before locking eyes on Damian. "Your Honor," she began, "our position is that Mr. Carter's circumstances make him ill-equipped to raise his daughter. We believe Anaya would thrive in a more stable environment with her grandparents, who can provide both financial security and proper guidance." Damian's own lawyer, Mr. Rowland, leaned forward but said nothing yet, waiting for the right moment to respond. Damian could feel his pulse drumming in his ears. He wanted to shout that he was stable, that he had a good job now as an engineering technician, that he could pay the mortgage and still tuck Anaya in every single night. But he knew how easily raw emotion could be used against him. So he stood in silence, jaw clenched, letting the judge's gaze rake over him. "Mr. Carter," Judge Whitmore said, not bothering to hide a condescending edge in his voice, "I've read your file. Late utility bills, 1 or 2 scuffles with your neighbors, lost your job 3 years ago, then took 4 months to find new work. Now you want me to believe you can offer a child stability?" He paused, letting the question hang. "Why should I be convinced you won't fail her again?" Damian swallowed hard. He remembered the humiliating days of unemployment when the factory he'd worked at for years shut down. Back then, he had nearly lost his home. He remembered half the neighborhood making assumptions because of his size and his race, muttering that he was intimidating. Those memories settled into a tight knot in his stomach. He exhaled slowly, meeting the judge's stare. Before Damian could speak, a disturbance caught everyone's attention. Mr. Rowland's cell phone buzzed on the table, jolting the solemn air. The judge's lips flattened in disapproval, but Rowland only glanced at the screen, pressed the silent button, and returned his focus to the bench. "My apologies, Your Honor," he murmured. Whitmore drummed his fingers on the arm of his chair. "Yes, well, see that it doesn't happen again. Now, Ms. Mills, you mentioned that Mr. Carter's occasional tardiness on bills indicates financial instability. Would you care to elaborate?" Smelling blood in the water, Mills pressed on. She detailed Damian's previous job losses, small lapses in child support payments when times were particularly tough, even though, ironically, he was the one who had custody the majority of the time. She focused on every minor misstep, painting Damian as a man on the brink, irresponsible at best, reckless at worst. All the while, Judge Whitmore nodded along, his expression carved from stone. Damian's cheeks burned. From the corner of his eye, he saw Anaya sitting quietly in the spectator area, her posture rigid, hands twisting in her lap. She had insisted on being present because she couldn't bear the idea of not knowing what was being said about her father. A pang of guilt shot through him. He hated that she was forced to witness this, forced to see her own father dissected like a specimen. At last, Mr. Rowland rose. He was a calm, measured attorney, known for meticulously building his defense. Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Carter has maintained full-time employment for the past 2 years. He has not been late with a single bill or payment in that period. He also completed a certified parenting course, demonstrating a clear willingness to go above and beyond. Rowland picked up a neat stack of paperwork. We can submit these receipts and references from his community. He volunteers as a youth mentor, coaches a local soccer team for underprivileged kids. Coaching soccer does not necessarily prove financial security, the judge snapped. Rowland met Whitmore's stare. Of course not. But it does speak to Mr. Carter's dedication to guiding children and engaging with his neighborhood in a positive way. He's building stability by building community, and that's precisely what a father should do. Whitmore let out a dismissive snort, turning his gaze back to Damien. You served in the military for a short stint, did you not? And you claim that your experience there shows discipline. However, your record states you only served 4 years. Why didn't you make it a career if you valued stability so much? Damien's fists tightened at his sides. I was honorably discharged, Your Honor, he answered, keeping his tone respectful. I came home because my mother fell ill, and I needed to care for her. At the time, my daughter was only a toddler. I chose to be present for my family rather than re-enlist. The judge arched a brow in a way that suggested he found Damien's explanation unconvincing. All these choices, Mr. Carter, yet your finances still suffered. I wonder if you truly understand the weight of the responsibility you're claiming. A wave of frustration rolled through the courtroom. Damien spotted a few folks shifting uncomfortably. Others recognized the subtle undertone of the judge's words, the prejudice barely concealed in his sneer. The bailiff, an older black woman, caught Damien's eye for half a second, sympathy evident on her face. For a moment, a hush fell. Damien's lawyer inhaled, but before Rowland could speak, the judge picked up the case file again. It says here your father was incarcerated when you were a teen. That must have been quite formative. And your mother, didn't she struggle with addiction? Damien's jaw set. Those details, though true, had nothing to do with his ability to parent. But he saw how the judge was weaving a narrative. I learned what not to do, he said softly. And I learned how to stand on my own. That's why I'm still standing. Whitmore's mouth twisted. Standing, yes, but are you stable? Or simply stubborn? I notice you mention in your statement that you've received recognition for your military service. A handful of medals, perhaps. In my courtroom, a medal is meaningless if you can't keep a roof over your child's head. A ripple of discomfort shuddered through the audience. Mr. Rowland looked ready to object, but Damien lifted a subtle hand. He stepped forward, ignoring the dryness in his throat. With respect, Your Honor, that medal isn't about bragging rights. I earned it by saving lives under fire. I mention it because it shows I'm willing to put everything on the line for those I protect. Whitmore let out a short, sharp laugh that made Damien's stomach clench. So dramatic. This is a custody matter, not a war zone. Damien's cheeks burned again, but he forced himself to remain steady. Sometimes fighting for custody feels like a war, he admitted, especially when the odds are stacked against you. He glanced at Anaya, who was watching him with wide, dark eyes. He saw in her face the reflection of all they had endured together. Her mother's departure, those nights he'd sat up studying engineering manuals by the glow of a single lamp, while Anaya slept in the next room. the times he doubted himself but kept going anyway. "And I assume," Whitmore continued, voice tinged with mockery, "you're about to tell me how Anaya is safer with a father who can handle an assault rifle." Damien's heart hammered, but he remained composed. "No, sir. I'm here to say she's safer with a father who knows how to adapt under pressure, remain calm in chaos, and never give up on the people he loves." For a heartbeat, the judge was silent, perhaps taken aback by Damien's steady tone. Then, like a cat with a trapped mouse, Whitmore's lips curved with faint satisfaction. "We'll see about that. Ms. Mills, I assume you have further evidence against Mr. Carter's so-called stability." She stood, flipping through pages as if they contained a treasure trove of Damien's faults. But as she began outlining each point, a surprising thing happened. Someone in the back of the courtroom rose. It was Anaya, small but determined, stepping into the aisle. "He's not perfect," she said, voice trembling with nerves, "but he's my dad, and everything he does, it's for me." A ripple of shock passed through those assembled, and Ms. Mills faltered. The judge's expression darkened. "Young lady, you need to remain seated unless you are called." But Anaya didn't retreat. "You said medals don't matter," she whispered, voice quivering. "But you've never seen how my dad looks at his. You don't know how he earned it. You haven't heard about the people he rescued." Damien's heart squeezed, pride warring with worry for his daughter. He didn't want her to get scolded by the judge, but he couldn't bring himself to silence her. Whitmore glowered. "This is highly irregular. Sit down before I have you removed." Anaya hesitated, then shifted her gaze to Mr. Rowland. The attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, perhaps we should hear the child's perspective. She is 10, old enough to express her wishes regarding custody." Whitmore's lips pressed into a thin line. The law did allow for the child's viewpoint in certain custody cases, but typically through a private interview or a guardian ad litem. Still, the open defiance on Anaya's face clearly irritated him. Slowly, he inclined his head. "Very well. Let's hear this crucial insight." Anaya looked down at the worn edges of the small bag clutched in her hands. She stepped closer to the bench and took out a velvet-covered box. "This is Dad's medal," she said, opening it carefully. A faint shine glinted from the gold emblem inside. "He only brings it out on 2 occasions. The day someone he served with passes away, and the day he reminds himself not to give up on me." Wordless murmurs filled the room. Even the judge seemed momentarily at a loss for words. No one had expected a child to stand with such clarity. Meanwhile, Ms. Mills looked uncomfortable, as though she sensed the narrative slipping beyond her control. "This medal," Anaya said, blinking back tears, "is from when he risked his life to protect people in a village overseas. He wasn't thinking about promotions or a paycheck. He was thinking about all the families who needed help." She paused, voice dropping lower. "That's how he treats me every day. He never, ever gives up, even when everyone else says he should." Damien realized his hand was trembling. He reached up, wiping a stray tear from his cheek. He hadn't known Anaya understood so much about how he felt. The hush in the courtroom was so profound that a distant cough echoed like thunder. At last, the judge spoke, though his voice sounded less certain now. "Miss Carter, we appreciate your sentiment, but custody rulings don't hinge on a medal." Anaya turned those fierce brown eyes on him. "Maybe not. But it should hinge on the fact that he's always there for me. He works hard. He taught me to fix broken appliances so we wouldn't have to spend money we didn't have. He makes me read before bed to keep my grades up. He's doing everything he can, and he doesn't deserve to be mocked for it." A stunned silence followed. Damien saw a flicker in Whitmore's eyes, something like surprise or perhaps grudging respect. Yet the judge's pride was formidable, and it wasn't about to crumble easily. "Court will recess," Whitmore announced, rapping his gavel sharply. "We will resume after lunch." As he rose, the judge shot Damien a look that still brimmed with skepticism, yet a hint of uncertainty had crept in. One thing was for sure: Anaya's words and the sight of that medal had shifted something in the atmosphere. But what would it mean for Damien's fight to keep his daughter? Outside in the corridor, lawyers and onlookers buzzed with whispers. Damien pulled Anaya into a hug, marveling at her courage. Meanwhile, Ms. Mills retreated to confer with the grandparents, their faces pale as if they realized this wasn't going the way they'd planned. Just before returning to chambers, Judge Whitmore paused at the threshold, stealing a glance back at Damien and the small velvet box that still gleamed in Anaya's hands. For the first time, he seemed to hesitate, as though reconsidering the assumptions he'd carried into the courtroom. The real question was, would that flicker of doubt be enough to change the course of the hearing and keep a father and daughter together? As the lunch recess began, Damien guided Anaya from the bustling courtroom to a quieter hallway, away from prying eyes. His heart still pounded from the tension, and he knew Anaya must be shaken, though she tried to appear composed. Her outburst in front of the judge was risky, but he couldn't blame her. In truth, he felt pride swelling in his chest, seeing how fiercely she had spoken up for him. Passing the corridor's vending machines, he spotted Mr. Rowland waiting near a worn wooden bench, flipping through his notes with a focused expression. The lawyer gestured for them to sit. They all needed a moment to process what had just happened: the memory of Whitmore's sneer, Anaya's trembling voice, and that medal shining in the fluorescent light. "Your daughter's testimony was unexpected," Rowland said quietly. "But it might be the best thing that could have happened. It's not common for a child to speak so openly during a hearing, especially in front of a judge who's as stern as Whitmore. However, her honesty might leave an impression that's difficult to dismiss." He glanced at Damien. "But we have to be careful. Once we return, the judge might try to reassert his authority. He may conduct a private interview with Anaya, or he might direct more pointed questions at you. I want us ready for that." Damien nodded, releasing a slow breath. "I'm prepared. After everything we've been through, I can handle a grumpy judge. I just hope it's enough. I don't want Anaya feeling any more pressure." Anaya, still clutching the velvet box that held her father's medal, peered up at Damien. "Sorry," she said softly, "for talking when I wasn't supposed to. I just got so mad. He acted like you're not good enough." Damien wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Don't be sorry. You stood up for what's right. I appreciate you, and I'm proud of you." Anaya's eyes glistened with relief. The weight of morning's tension remained, but at least they had a brief respite to gather themselves. Beyond the tall windows at the end of the hall, sunlight glowed off city rooftops. Lunchtime bustle drifted in from the lobby, people hurrying to grab a quick meal, whispering about the unusual drama that had erupted in the courtroom that day. In another corner of the hallway, Anaya's maternal grandparents conferred with their attorney, Ms. Mills. The older couple occasionally glanced Damien's way with stern disapproval. He recalled that they had never truly accepted him, not even when he and their daughter were together. They claimed he lacked proper upbringing, as if one's background determined destiny. Damien felt a familiar pang of frustration. He didn't doubt their love for Anaya, but he resented their assumption that his struggles meant he was an unfit father. He also remembered how, in the worst moments, they had offered no help, only accusations. Now, seeing them huddled in tense conversation, he suspected they might be planning some new angle to sway the judge's opinion once the hearing resumed. When the bailiff announced that the court would reconvene in 15 minutes, Damien urged Anaya to use the restroom and splash some water on her face. She nodded, disappearing around the corner with a shy wave. Roland moved closer to Damien, voice lowered. I think we should mention your stable employment again, as well as the mentorship program at the community center. And if the judge allows it, I want to call your supervisor as a character witness. Damien shrugged wearily. If it helps. I want everything out in the open. I've got nothing to hide. Roland studied him with an empathetic gaze. I wish every parent fought this hard for their child. Let's hope we can make Whitmore see that. Walking back into the courtroom felt like stepping onto a battlefield. The hush that fell was almost tangible, heavy with expectation. Judge Whitmore perched on the bench, flipping through papers with a detached air. Yet Damien caught the judge's quick glance at Anaya, lingering on the metal box in her hand. Whitmore cleared his throat. I trust everyone used the recess productively. Let's proceed. Ms. Mills stood, posture stiff, and reasserted the argument that Anaya would be better off with grandparents who had never faced financial uncertainty. She pointed out that they had a spacious home, established retirements, and could potentially pay for private schooling. Why should a child's future be limited, she pressed, by a father's precarious means? Mr. Rowland rose in response, speaking with calm conviction. A child's future is not solely determined by money. It's also shaped by love, dedication, consistent presence, and moral guidance. Mr. Carter has proven he can give Anaya all of that. Yes, he's had hardships, like many Americans, but he overcame them. He's up to date on bills, has a career path, and, most importantly, a profound bond with his daughter. This is not speculation. It's evident in her own words and actions. The lawyer flipped through a file. We also have several letters from neighbors, teachers, and the director of the youth mentorship program who all vouch for Mr. Carter's devotion and reliability. If needed, we can have them testify. He locked eyes with Whitmore. This family shouldn't be torn apart lightly. Whitmore leaned back, expression unreadable. Does the grandmother or grandfather wish to speak? Slowly, Anaya's grandfather approached the stand, adjusting the lapels of his neat blazer. He described the environment they could offer, a quiet suburban neighborhood with little crime, a large backyard, funds for any extracurricular interests Anaya might have. We don't dislike Damien, he said carefully, but the tone revealed a long-standing tension. We just believe Anaya shouldn't have to worry about whether the electricity might be turned off, or if some fresh crisis will emerge. Damien's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself not to interrupt. The older man paused, then added, and we aren't convinced he can sustain his current lifestyle. History shows a pattern of problems and late payments. We want peace of mind. Before Roland could counter, Whitmore looked toward Anaya again. Young lady, he began, though his tone was less cutting now. I need to ask you something directly. Do you understand the concerns your grandparents have? Anaya nodded, her gaze shifting momentarily to the couple before returning to the judge. Yes, sir, I do. They worry that Dad won't always have enough money. But I remember the times we almost lost our house, and he still found a way to keep a roof over my head. I never went hungry. I never missed a day of school. He always made sure of that. Maybe we don't live in a fancy neighborhood, but it's our home, and I feel safe there. She paused, voice earnest. I'd rather stay with him. A wave of emotion swelled behind Damien's ribs as he listened. That final line, I'd rather stay with him, echoed in the silent chamber. Whitmore's gaze flicked toward Ms. Mills, then back to the grandparents, who exchanged pained looks. For a moment it seemed the judge might relent. But then, perhaps protective of his authority, Whitmore's voice hardened. Children don't always understand what's best for them. They see the present, not the future. Mr. Carter, let's assume your finances hold up. How do you address the concern that you lack a suitable support system? This petition suggests you have no extended family capable of helping if something goes wrong. Damien cleared his throat. I have friends, community ties, and a stable presence in my daughter's life. That's my support system. Whitmore's gaze narrowed. And your medal, that's supposed to prove you're ready for anything? Because you handled yourself well under fire? Damien inhaled, choosing his words carefully. I mention my service not to claim I'm invincible, but to show I've learned perseverance and responsibility. It's a reflection of sacrifice, not bravado. I wanted you to see I don't run from challenges. Parenting is tough, but I face it head-on. My daughter is living proof that even when times were hard, I stayed. A faint scoff escaped the judge's lips, but the spectators were leaning forward. Whether Whitmore accepted it or not, Damien's message was landing. He could sense people understanding that he was not just a stereotype, but a man who refused to give up. Ms. Mills attempted to pivot, referencing old reports again, but the mood in the room had shifted. Something about Anaya's direct plea, combined with Damien's quiet resolve, seemed to linger in the air. The grandparents sat stiffly, perhaps realizing that winning a custody battle was harder when the child herself kept insisting she belonged with her father. At last, Whitmore exhaled. He drummed his fingers once more on the bench. This is not a simple decision. The court's duty is to ensure the child's best interest is served. I'll weigh everything I've heard. I would, however, like to speak with Anaya privately in my chambers. Roland nodded, prepared for this possibility. Damien nodded too, his stomach tensed. This private interview could sway everything. Anaya rose, glancing nervously at her father, who managed a reassuring smile. She followed the bailiff toward the judge's office, the medal still clutched tight in one small hand. The silence in the courtroom became almost suffocating once the door closed behind her. Damien could practically feel the grandparents staring holes into his back. They wanted Anaya for reasons he could partly understand. They believed in their own form of security, but love, to Damien, meant more than a padded bank account. After what felt like an eternity, the door reopened. Anaya stepped out, her eyes red but determined. Whitmore emerged behind her, expression inscrutable. The judge paused at the threshold, cleared his throat, and addressed everyone. I'll review my notes and make a decision shortly. Court is recessed. A ripple of unease swept through the room. People rose from the benches, murmuring about possible outcomes. Damien rushed to Anaya's side, searching her face for clues. She simply leaned into him, clutching his arm. Then behind them, Judge Whitmore disappeared back into his chambers. Damien held his daughter close, bracing himself for whatever came next. He had done all he could. Now, the question was whether it would be enough. A hush settled over the hallway once Anaya's private interview ended, and even the distant clatter of law clerks rushing by seemed muted. Damien rested a hand on his daughter's shoulder, but she stood with her head lowered, shoulders tight. He wanted to ask what Judge Whitmore had said, yet he held back, recalling Roland's advice to let her process whatever questions the judge had thrown at her. Ms. Mills and the grandparents hovered near the far wall, their stern expressions interrupted by anxious glances at Anaya, as though they sensed the tides might be turning against them. Mr. Roland joined Damien and Anaya, offering them both a small, reassuring smile. Let's find a place to sit, he suggested, motioning to the wooden benches that lined the corridor. They settled themselves, and Anaya leaned against her father, letting the stress of the day weigh on her small frame. Her hair was slightly mussed, and she nervously smoothed the front of her blouse, as if trying to regain a sense of order. Damien felt his heart ache at how old she suddenly seemed for a 10-year-old child. These proceedings had aged her, pushing her into a world of adult worries. What did he ask you? Damien ventured softly, once they were a bit apart from the bustle. Anaya tucked her chin. He asked if you ever got angry at me. Or if I was scared living in our house. Damien tensed, remembering how Whitmore had hinted at prejudice, painting Damien as some hot-tempered figure who might lash out at his child. "You told him the truth?" he asked, though he was almost sure of the answer. She gave him a faint nod. "I said you get frustrated sometimes, but never with me. It's usually when, I don't know, bills come in or something breaks. But you always calm down and tell me it's not my fault." She paused, eyes welling with tears. "I told him I'm never scared with you." Damien pulled her into a gentle side hug. "That's what matters." Roland cleared his throat. "All we can do now is wait. Judges like Whitmore tend to brood on these decisions. Given his style, he might make you sweat it out for a few more hours, or even postpone a ruling another day or two." A flicker of alarm widened Anaya's eyes. "Days, but—" Damien exhaled, his breath shaky. "Whatever happens, kid, we face it together." Across the hall, the grandparents conferred in hushed tones with Ms. Mills, whose posture had grown stiff, as if sensing the momentum shift. Damien wondered if they'd throw a new accusation into the mix to try to rattle the judge's final decision. He could almost see the tension etched on their faces, particularly on the grandmother's, whose lips formed a hard line every time she looked in Anaya's direction. Just then the bailiff emerged from behind a heavy oak door, calling them back to the courtroom. "Judge Whitmore will reconvene in 5 minutes," she announced, her voice echoing off marble walls. Everyone stood, shoulders squared, hearts pounding with anticipation. Damien whispered something reassuring to Anaya, and they walked into the courtroom together, feeling every eye pinned on them. The judge took his seat, expression unreadable as he stacked his papers neatly. He looked out over the room, meeting first the grandparents' gaze, then Ms. Mills's, then Damien's. His face revealed no immediate hint of sympathy or condemnation, just a blank judicial mask. "I've heard testimony from both sides. I've reviewed the evidence. I've also spoken with the child at length." The judge paused, slowly letting his gaze land on Anaya before returning to the documents in front of him. "As it stands, there are understandable concerns about Mr. Carter's past financial struggles and limited support system. Yet it's clear Anaya has strong emotional bonds with her father." He coughed slightly, shifting in his chair. "In matters of custody, the law directs me to weigh the child's best interest above all else. While material stability is a factor, it is not the sole determiner." Damien's heart thundered in his chest. Anaya gripped his forearm, her face pale. For a moment, all background noise seemed to vanish, leaving only the relentless hammer of Damien's pulse. "I will not overlook Mr. Carter's lapses in the past," Whitmore continued, "nor the fact that he has had conflicts with neighbors and issues that might affect long-term stability. However, the child has made clear her desire to remain with her father. She appears to feel secure and nurtured by him. The grandparents, though offering a more financially secure home, have not provided sufficient evidence that Mr. Carter is unfit to meet Anaya's needs." Ms. Mills stirred, about to object, but the judge raised one hand to forestall her. "I acknowledge that this ruling may disappoint the grandparents. They are free to pursue visitation rights and remain an integral part of Anaya's life. But as of now, the court finds no compelling reason to sever Mr. Carter's custody." He flicked his gaze pointedly. "If new, credible concerns arise in the future, the petitioners may refile. Until such time, custody remains with the father." In that moment, Damien realized he had stopped breathing. Relief flooded through him so swiftly it made his knees weak. He blinked, glancing down at Anaya, who stood frozen as if unsure she had heard correctly. The grandparents looked stricken, and Ms. Mills's lips pressed into a thin line. Meanwhile, Mr. Rowland exhaled an audible sigh of relief, giving Damien a discreet thumbs up. Whitmore's gravelly voice delivered the final note, "Court is adjourned." The gavel dropped, its echo punctuating the verdict that Damian Carter retained custody of his daughter. No applause erupted. Family court rarely elicited such displays, but the wave of emotion in the room was tangible. Damian knelt to meet Anaya at eye level, and tears welled in both their eyes. She threw her arms around his neck, hugging him so fiercely his breath caught in his throat. "We did it, Dad," she whispered, voice trembling. "We get to stay together." He held her tightly, murmuring, "Yeah, baby girl, we do." Above them, the grandparents exchanged anguished looks. Part of Damian felt compassion. They'd lost the legal battle, and he knew they genuinely believed they were doing right by Anaya. Still, his relief and gratitude for the outcome drowned out any sympathy for their disappointment. Ms. Mills approached, leveling him with a cool look. "Congratulations," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Turning on her heel, she made her way toward the door, the grandparents trailing behind, their body language stiff. They paused only once. Anaya's grandmother turned, opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Her gaze flicked to Anaya, sorrow etched in her eyes, before she followed Miss Mills out. In the aisle, Mr. Rowland shook Damian's hand vigorously. "Well done. Your composure, your honesty, and above all your daughter's powerful words really swayed things. Even Whitmore couldn't deny her sincerity." He smiled kindly at Anaya. "You're quite a remarkable young lady." Anaya grinned sheepishly, wiping tears. "I was just telling the truth." Rowland nodded. "That's often what prevails." Within minutes, the courtroom emptied. The tension evaporated, replaced by a quiet hum of relief. Damian gathered his things, some scattered papers, his jacket, the velvet box containing his medal, and paused at the threshold, feeling as though he'd just fought a war of his own, a different kind of battle for the people he loved. Soon after, he and Anaya stepped out into the mid-afternoon sunshine. It gilded the courthouse steps in soft light, as if nature itself was granting them a benediction. Anaya lifted her face to the sun, eyes closed, inhaling deeply. When she opened them, she smiled. A real carefree smile that made her look like a kid again, unburdened. "Want to celebrate?" Damian asked gently, still cautious, as though the rug might be pulled out from under them any second. "Ice cream? A late lunch at our favorite diner?" Anaya's eyes lit up. "Ice cream, definitely." She laughed and hugged him one more time, almost dancing in place. "I love you, Dad," she said. He stroked her braided hair, feeling tears threaten again. "I love you too. Let's go." They walked down the broad steps, savoring the fresh air. Passers-by barely noticed them, a father and daughter leaving the courthouse, nothing newsworthy at a glance. But to Damian, it felt like a cinematic moment. Sunlight, relief, and the promise of a stable future with his child. Even the city traffic seemed friendlier. "Dad," Anaya said once they reached the sidewalk, "do you think Judge Whitmore hates us?" Damian hesitated, choosing his words. "I don't think he hates us, honey. I just think maybe he's used to seeing the worst in people." He glanced toward the imposing pillars of the courthouse behind them. "And sometimes when people expect the worst, it's hard for them to see anything else." Anaya fell quiet, processing that. Then she nodded. "I'm glad he changed his mind today, or at least decided in our favor." "Me too." They slipped into the crowd, moving along the sidewalk, heading toward the small ice cream shop Anaya loved. As they walked, Damian's phone buzzed. It was a text from a co-worker who must have seen the court calendar update. It simply read, "Good luck, man. Thinking of you." Damian realized he wouldn't have to reply with bad news this time. Instead, he typed a quick message, "All good. We won custody." He felt lighter than he had in weeks. The ice cream parlor soon appeared, a quaint storefront with striped awnings, They entered, greeted by the sweet scent of waffle cones. Damien ordered 2 sundaes, and they found a corner table. As Anaya drizzled chocolate sauce with gleeful abandon, Damien watched the tension drain from her face. She was just a child again, excited about dessert, no longer a young girl forced to stand up in court and defend her father's worth. "How do you feel?" he asked, watching her carefully. Her mouth curved around the spoon in a grin. "I feel safe. I feel like it's over and we can go back to normal." Damien nodded slowly, noticing a slight quiver in his own breath. Yeah, normal. He wasn't sure normal would come immediately. They still had the sting of the hearing, and the grandparents might try again in the future. He also knew that outside this little victory, real life continued. Bills, job responsibilities, and the stereotypes he still encountered as a single black father. But for this moment, none of that weighed him down. Here, in the booth with his daughter, sticky with ice cream and relief, life felt good. When they finished, they wandered back out into the sunshine. Anaya slipped her hand into Damien's, and for a while, they strolled without speaking, listening to the city's afternoon sounds. Horns honking, the murmur of passing conversation, the hum of construction somewhere in the distance. "Dad?" Anaya eventually ventured. "Hmm?" She squeezed his hand. "Thanks for never giving up." His throat tightened. He wanted to say something grand, something that matched the enormity of the gratitude he felt. Toward her, toward everyone who had supported them, even toward fate for giving him the chance to stand strong. But words fell short. Instead, he looked at her, the light in her eyes, and said simply, "Always." The rest of that day was a swirl of mundane but comforting tasks. Picking up groceries, laughing over which cereal to choose, discussing weekend plans. Ordinary stuff, which felt like a treasure after so much uncertainty. Damien found himself humming under his breath. Each time he looked down and saw Anaya's smile, it was as though a weight had been lifted from his heart. Later at home, he realized how tense he'd been about the possibility of losing her. Now, as he looked around the living room, slightly shabby couch, mismatched lamps, the old TV stand he'd built himself, he saw it not as a mark of failure but as a place of memories. He had taught Anaya her first alphabet letters here, shown her how to read, how to sort Legos by color. They had danced in this very spot on nights when bills were tight, but their spirits were still rich with hope. Before bed, he and Anaya sat on that couch, going through a few of her school assignments. She was behind in math due to the stress of the custody hearing, so they reviewed multiplication tables. By the time she yawned, eyeing the clock, he realized she'd made good progress. "Off to bed, kiddo," he said softly, closing her workbook. "Tomorrow's a new day." "Yeah," she said, rising and stretching. "A new day, and I don't have to worry if I'll be here or somewhere else, just here." Damien's heart clenched, hearing the truth of how she'd felt. The haunting worry that any moment someone might snatch her away. "Right here," he murmured, "where you belong." She went off to brush her teeth, and Damien sat for a moment alone, the old overhead light buzzing. He spotted the velvet box on the coffee table, the metal inside still shining faintly where a lamp's glow reached. The judge had mocked it as worthless in proving fatherhood, but somehow that metal had become a symbol of his determination. Standing in a war zone to protect strangers felt oddly similar to standing in a courtroom to protect the person who mattered most. Different settings, same courage. He picked up the box and placed it gently in his bedroom drawer. Then he flicked off the living room light and leaned against the wall, listening to the quiet hush of their home. Through the thin walls, he heard water running in the bathroom as Anaya finished her bedtime routine. In a few minutes, she padded into the hall, wrapped in a soft robe. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "Do we have to do anything more with the court?" He shook his head with a small smile. Not for now. We're good. She exhaled, seeming lighter. Okay, good night. Good night, baby girl. Sleep well. He watched her disappear into her room, feeling a rush of warmth at the simple fact that she was still here, in this apartment, safe and sound. Once her door closed, he stayed there for a minute longer, letting relief saturate every corner of his mind. Tomorrow he'd deal with bills, work, and the everyday realities of single parenthood. But tonight, he allowed himself to savor the victory, knowing his daughter was his to protect, to guide, to love, without a judge or a sealed file threatening to tear them apart. Barely a week had passed since the custody hearing, yet Damien still woke each morning with a faint sense of disbelief at how everything had turned out. This particular Saturday, he moved about their small kitchen with unhurried care, readying scrambled eggs for Anaya and relishing the cheerful light streaming through the window. Much of the tension that had once weighed on him, fearful thoughts about possibly losing her, had disappeared since the judge ruled in his favor. Now the air in their apartment felt somehow brighter. As the eggs began to sizzle, he remembered the pure relief in Anaya's eyes that day, the same joy he heard in her voice now, humming a tune as she entered the room. He grinned at the sight of her in an oversized t-shirt, hair still messy from sleep. "Morning, kiddo. Ready for breakfast?" he asked. She nodded and climbed onto the high stool near the counter, tucking her legs beneath her. Damien still marveled at how quickly she'd regained her ease, no longer glancing around anxiously or double-checking that she hadn't been whisked away. He placed a plate of eggs, toast, and a side of fresh fruit in front of her. "Any plans today?" Anaya, still blinking the last of her sleep away, brightened. "I wanted to practice basketball at the park," she said, wiggling her feet. "That league starts soon and I don't want to embarrass myself. Besides, I really like the new ball you got me." Damien couldn't hide his amusement. "You're sure you won't miss the net every time?" he teased lightly. She flashed him a playful scowl. "I'm not that bad." Together they chatted about school, her new extracurricular interests, and the possibility of visiting the community center where Damien sometimes volunteered. He had always tried to immerse Anaya in positive outlets, youth programs, local sports, anything that built her confidence. It felt especially good now to discuss these plans without that ever-present knot in his stomach. Even a short time ago, the question of custody hung over everything they did. But the court had affirmed what he'd always known. Anaya belonged with him. After breakfast, they washed dishes in comfortable silence. The old radio on the windowsill played a soft jazz tune, filling the kitchen with a mellow rhythm. Anaya, perched on a chair, dried the plates while Damien rinsed. Sunlight glimmered across the countertop, and he realized he couldn't recall the last time a weekend had felt so peaceful. No attorney calls, no last-minute summons from the courthouse. The realization made his shoulders relax. But just as they finished tidying up, Damien's phone vibrated on the table. Wiping his hands on a dishcloth, he picked it up to check the message. It was from his co-worker, Jeff, reminding him about a veterans recognition ceremony at City Hall that afternoon. Damien had been invited weeks ago, an event honoring local servicemen and women for acts of valor overseas. Caught in the swirl of the custody battle, he'd nearly forgotten. He exhaled, glancing at Anaya. She picked up on his hesitation immediately. "Something up?" He shrugged. "Sort of. There's this ceremony for vets today. I'd signed up, but I'm not sure if it's worth going. I'm not big on ceremonies, and we did plan to practice basketball." He trailed off. Anaya tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Why not go? They're recognizing you, right?" Her tone suggested she thought the answer was obvious. Damien slipped the phone into his pocket. "I guess. But you know how I feel about being the center of attention," he admitted. "Sometimes I'd rather just keep my head down." Yet Anaya, wise beyond her years, said quietly, "Dad, you stood up in that courtroom, you never backed down. Why should this be any different? You're always telling me that when you do good things, you should be proud. Remember how you told the judge about your service?" She paused, fiddling with the dishcloth. "I think you should go. I'd like to see it." Her words hit home. He recalled the moment in court when Judge Whitmore had sneered at the significance of his medal. Damien had tried not to take it personally, but it still stung, that assumption that his service didn't matter. Now, hearing Anaya's gentle confidence, he felt an odd urge to prove otherwise, perhaps not just to the world, but to himself. "All right," he said, nodding. "We'll go. Afterward, we'll head to the park so you can practice your shot. Deal?" She grinned. "Deal." They tidied up the kitchen, then changed into nicer clothes, Damien in crisp slacks and a charcoal shirt, Anaya in a floral dress with a simple cardigan. Heading out, they locked the apartment behind them, stepping into the mild warmth of late morning. The drive downtown took them past familiar landmarks: the community college where Damien once considered taking night classes, the old library Anaya used to visit every Saturday morning. Each location reminded him how far they'd come as a family. City Hall was easy to spot with its grand steps and tall columns. A modest crowd had gathered inside, filling an ornate reception area with hushed conversation and the clink of coffee cups. Damien recognized Jeff waiting near a long table where volunteers offered programs. "You made it," Jeff said, offering a handshake. "They're about to start in 15 minutes. You excited?" Damien gave a half smile. "Well, let's say I'm trying to be." Anaya stood at Damien's side, scanning the high ceilings with awe. She nudged him. "This is fancy. Didn't realize it was such a big deal." He nodded, swallowing nerves that began to gather. "It's bigger than I thought." They followed Jeff into the main chamber, a grand hall with rows of chairs facing a small stage, flags and patriotic banners draped behind a podium. People mingled, greeting each other with that polite warmth typical of official functions. Damien guided Anaya to 2 seats near the aisle, scanning the crowd. He spotted a few uniformed soldiers, some older veterans with silver hair, a handful of city council members. Then, with a jolt, he noticed a cluster of local judges. Among them, a familiar figure, Judge Whitmore. That stern face was unmistakable. Damien's stomach clenched. Did Whitmore attend a lot of these ceremonies, or was there some direct connection? "Dad?" Anaya whispered, having caught sight of the judge too. He patted her hand. "It's all right. Let's just focus on why we're here." Still, he couldn't quell the uneasy feeling. Memories of the courtroom flitted across his mind. Whitmore's dismissive remarks, his scrutiny of Damien's finances and background. Yet in the end, the judge had ruled in Damien's favor, albeit begrudgingly. Damien wondered if Whitmore recognized him in these new surroundings. Music began playing from a speaker. The hush that fell was immediate. A councilwoman took the podium, welcoming everyone and outlining the significance of the awards. Damien's name appeared in the pamphlet Anaya clutched. Damien Carter, recognized for distinguished bravery under fire and continued community involvement. A hint of pride swelled in her expression. One by one, recipients' names were called. Military men and women approached the stage to shake hands, accept plaques, and pose for photos. When Damien's turn arrived, he stood, adjusting his tie. Anaya gave him a quick thumbs up. Walking toward the stage, he was all too aware of Whitmore's eyes following him from somewhere in the front rows. The councilwoman read from a short statement. How Damien had assisted in rescue operations after an attack, risking his safety to protect civilians. Applause echoed softly around the chamber. He accepted a plaque featuring a small engraved plate. A flash from the photographer's camera momentarily blinded him. Damien forced a polite smile, feeling his pulse roar in his ears. As he returned to his seat, he passed close by the row of judges. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Whitmore watch him, expression inscrutable. No words were exchanged, but something in Whitmore's posture suggested surprise, or maybe a grudging acknowledgement. When the ceremony ended, the crowd dispersed into the foyer. Some lingered for refreshments, others slipped out to meet the day's chores. Damien navigated the swirl of people, exchanging a few handshakes. A couple of old military acquaintances recognized him, sparking brief conversations. Through it all, Anaya stayed at his side, hugging the plaque gently as though it were her own. Suddenly, she tugged his sleeve. Turning, he found himself face to face with Judge Whitmore, whose formal attire and rigid posture looked almost unchanged from the bench. "Mr. Carter," Whitmore said, voice low amid the chatter. "Congratulations on the commendation. I had no idea you were one of today's honorees." Damien noted a hint of tension in the judge's stance, as if the man wasn't quite comfortable offering praise. "Thank you, Your Honor," Damien replied, keeping his tone respectful. He thought of the day in court when Whitmore implied his medal meant nothing regarding his fitness as a father. Perhaps, in this new setting, the judge was reconsidering that stance. Anaya stayed quiet, eyes drifting between Whitmore and her father. The judge cleared his throat. "I trust things are stable at home with your daughter?" He glanced at Anaya. "School going well?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." Whitmore gave a slight inclination of his head. "That's good to hear." Then, apparently satisfied he'd done his part, he offered Damien a curt nod and strode off to converse with someone else. Anaya released a breath. "He's different in public," she murmured. Damien let out a soft chuckle. "Yes, but I'm glad we didn't get a lecture." They headed for the exit. Sunshine washed over them as they stepped outside, a crisp breeze rustling the trees along the sidewalk. "You want to head to the park now?" Damien asked. Anaya broke into a grin. "Definitely." The plaque in her arms shone in the daylight, reflecting small glints of sun. "Can I hold this for a while?" she asked. "I want to read what it says again." Damien smiled. "Sure, but don't drop it. My name's spelled out real nice." She giggled, hugging it as they descended the City Hall steps. The drive to the park was short, passing vibrant murals and local shops bustling with weekend customers. Once they arrived, Anaya bounced out of the car, rummaging for her basketball in the trunk. Damien followed her onto the cracked asphalt court. A few kids were playing on the other side, but one half of the space remained open. As Anaya started dribbling, Damien watched her posture. She attempted a shot from the free throw line and missed by a foot. "Angle your wrist," he advised, stepping behind her, "and keep your elbow steady." On her second try, the ball swished through the net, prompting an excited whoop. The sound made Damien smile. This was the kind of moment no legal battle could take away. They kept at it for an hour, practicing layups and passes. Sometimes she faltered, frustration flashing across her features. But he reminded her how many times he'd had to practice his own skills, whether it was in the military or in adjusting to civilian life after returning home. "You have to keep pushing," he said, bouncing the ball to her, "even if it feels impossible at first." By the time they took a break, both were sweaty and content. They found a shady bench beneath a maple tree. Anaya sipped from a water bottle, her breathing gradually steadying. "Do you ever regret serving in the army?" she asked suddenly, a deep question from a 10-year-old. Damien shook his head after a thoughtful pause. "No. It taught me discipline, responsibility. Sometimes it was scary, and I saw things I wish I hadn't, but it also showed me how important it is to protect the people you care about. That's what I tried to explain in court. I guess Whitmore never really got it, She nodded, frowning slightly. I still can't believe how mean he was. I'm glad he changed his mind. Damien leaned back. I wouldn't say he changed his mind. He probably just followed the law, but yeah, I'm relieved. They let silence settle, broken only by the rustle of leaves overhead. Nearby, other children shouted in playful excitement, and the rhythmic bounce of basketballs kept time with the day's easygoing mood. Eventually, Anaya hopped up again, wanting to attempt more shots. Damien joined her, feeling a warm glow inside. Every moment with her felt like a victory lap now, proof that they had overcome the challenges of the hearing. As dusk approached, they gathered their things and headed out, sweaty and satisfied, ready to return to their apartment for a quiet evening. Back home, Damien placed the plaque on the coffee table. Anaya stared at it, brow furrowed. Dad, you should hang it on the wall with your medal. It's like the two go together. One is for what you did before I was born, and the other is for everything you've done since. Her statement carried an emotional resonance that struck him hard. She was right. One symbolized his past bravery overseas. The other recognized the spirit he now brought to fatherhood and community. All right, he said softly. We'll find a good spot for them both. And maybe we'll add your future trophies there. Anaya laughed. If I ever get good enough. He shook his head, draping an arm around her. You'll get there. Believe me. They settled into a calm evening routine. He prepared a simple dinner of chicken and rice while she showered. Then they ate together in front of the TV, watching a silly game show. Anaya offered commentary on the contestants, and Damien found himself laughing easily, with none of the tension that once haunted him. Later, when bedtime approached, Anaya lingered in the living room. Dad, she said softly, thanks for going to that ceremony. I liked seeing people honor you. You deserve it. He felt a gentle wave of affection for her, remembering the frantic nights when he feared a knock at the door would mean she had to pack her things. I appreciate that, honey, he replied, voice thick with emotion. And I'm glad you were there with me. Otherwise, it wouldn't have meant half as much. She gave him a quick hug and then padded off to her bedroom. Damien tidied up the dishes, reflecting on how everything changed since they learned the final custody decision. Anxiety no longer shadowed each step. He could plan for the future with confidence, enroll Anaya in sports without worrying that she might be moved to another city, keep working on the mentorship program at the community center, maybe even take an evening class himself. Before turning in, he fetched a small hammer and nails from a kitchen drawer, then carefully hung both the plaque and his medal on the living room wall. He chose a spot above a simple bookshelf, where the overhead light would catch the reflective surfaces. The medal's ribbon draped neatly, and the plaque's engraved text was easily readable. Stepping back, Damien admired the arrangement. It wasn't extravagant, but it told a story of perseverance, fatherhood, and the quiet courage of never giving up. His gaze strayed toward Anaya's closed door, where faint lamplight glowed from beneath the frame. Soon, he knew, that door would open for a new day, one in which father and daughter could continue forging memories free from the weight of an impending trial. The judge's doubts hadn't vanished, nor had the grandparents' disappointment, but those storms lay behind them now. In their place was a modest sense of hope, shining steadily like the lamp in Anaya's room. Damien flicked off the living room light, the last faint gleam from the newly hung medal and plaque fading into darkness. Tomorrow would be another day of small tasks and incremental steps forward. But for the first time in a long while, Damien didn't dread what morning would bring. He felt only gratitude and the deep conviction that no matter what obstacles arose, he and Anaya would face them together. Over the next couple of weeks, life found a comfortable rhythm for Damien and Anaya. On school days, they woke early, shared quick breakfasts, and parted ways with bright promises to discuss the day's events later. By evening, Anaya would chatter about classmates, new drills in basketball practice, or the comedic mishaps of the math club. She seemed lighter, as if the very air around her had shed the weight of uncertainty that once hovered. Damien, meanwhile, juggled his job at the engineering workshop with volunteer shifts at the community center, where he helped kids build small-scale robotics. Whenever he glanced at the plaque and medal on his living room wall, he felt that old flicker of disbelief recede further, replaced by a quiet conviction that they were truly moving forward. Occasionally he caught himself smiling for no particular reason, simply relieved that the fear of losing Anaya had passed. They had won more than a court ruling. They had reclaimed normalcy. During these calmer days, Anaya's grandparents requested a Saturday visit, hoping to remain part of her life. Though the memory of their legal challenge still stung, Damien agreed, recognizing that Anaya deserved a broader family connection if it could be managed peacefully. They met in a neutral setting, a family-friendly cafe near the old library, to ease any lingering tension. Anaya seemed guarded at first, uncertain whether her grandparents would renew their push for custody, but they surprised everyone by greeting her gently, asking about school and basketball rather than finances or living arrangements. Damien hovered nearby, listening for any sign of conflict, but the conversation stayed cordial. The grandparents, for all their previous mistrust, appeared chastened by the court's ruling. Perhaps they had realized that undermining Damien would only hurt Anaya in the end. As lunchtime waned, her grandmother hesitantly offered to help buy sports gear. Damien exchanged a measured look with Anaya before accepting the gesture. Nobody apologized, but it was a start. Anaya's mood lightened further after that meeting, as though some invisible burden had lifted. She told Damien on the drive home that it felt nice to speak with her grandparents without the tension of legal battles. Damien, listening to her quiet excitement, was reminded that children often bear the silent weight of adult conflicts. That night, Anaya spent extra time practicing free throws in the yard, and he could see the spring in her step, a sure sign she was no longer watching her every move out of fear. Later, when she settled in for bed, he returned to his living room to review the monthly budget. Though money remained a tightrope walk, it was a more hopeful one now that he had no looming court fees or uncertain future. He glanced at the plaque and medal on the wall, and an odd sense of contentment blossomed within him. He realized for once he could plan ahead without dreading some hidden catastrophe. Early the next week, Damien's supervisor offered him extra hours at the engineering workshop, a chance to earn overtime pay. Though he was hesitant to leave Anaya alone in the evenings, she insisted she'd be fine for a few hours, pointing out how close their supportive neighbors were. It was a testament to how she'd grown in confidence, and how their community ties had strengthened. Ever since the hearing, neighbors who once kept a polite distance now seemed more open, congratulating Damien or offering to watch Anaya if he worked late. He accepted the overtime, grateful for the financial cushion it might provide. Each night he returned to find dinner plates waiting in the kitchen sink, leftover macaroni or pizza boxes, and Anaya with a proud grin, detailing how she'd managed chores by herself. This routine, while tiring, gave Damien hope that they were finally building the stability he'd always dreamed of. He could see a future free from crisis or lurking dread. Still, a few shadows lingered. One evening, Damien spotted an unfamiliar sedan with tinted windows idling across the street. It drove away when he approached, leaving him unsettled. The next night, a similar car appeared, this time parked under a broken street lamp. Each encounter lasted only minutes with no confrontation, yet an uneasy prickle settled in his gut. Memories of the custody battle made him wonder if someone was observing him, waiting for the slightest misstep. Anaya seemed unaware, absorbed in homework and basketball drills, so Damien kept his worries private. Occasionally, he reminded himself that the grandparents had softened, unlikely to hire anyone for surveillance. Still, his instincts, honed by past hardships, refused to dismiss the pattern as random coincidence. Determined not to let fear ruin their hard-won peace, he adjusted small details of his routine, leaving at different times, checking the street before unlocking his door, and tried to assume these vehicles were just passers-by. Yet the tension wouldn't fully fade. He worried. On Saturday, Anaya's grandparents invited her to lunch again, choosing a cozy cafe near the library. Though remnants of distrust simmered beneath Damien's surface, he agreed, hoping an extended family bond might help Anaya flourish. At the cafe, he watched from a nearby table, letting them converse privately. The grandparents praised her basketball progress and offered to buy better shoes, which Anaya accepted with polite enthusiasm. When they urged her to spend weekends at their bigger suburban home, she hesitated, glancing at Damien. He joined them, calmly explaining that short visits were fine, but uprooting her from daily life might be disruptive. To his relief, they didn't press the point. Still, as he escorted Anaya back to the car, he surveyed the street for suspicious vehicles, finding none. She teased him about being paranoid, and he forced a chuckle, unwilling to burden her with his unease. Even so, he couldn't shake the sense that something lurked just out of sight. He stayed vigilant. That evening, Anaya's league held a casual scrimmage at the high school gym. Damien arrived early, claiming a seat near midcourt. Laughter and bouncing basketballs echoed off gleaming floors while parents chatted in the stands. Anaya joined her teammates, face radiant with excitement. When the game began, she dribbled with fresh confidence, weaving past defenders and scoring a surprising layup. Damien felt his heart swell with pride, clapping vigorously. Yet midway through the scrimmage, he noticed someone hovering near the far doors. A lone figure in a hooded sweatshirt, half hidden in the shadows. A flicker of light revealed what looked like a scar across the person's jaw. For a moment, Damien froze, recalling the tinted window sedans. Then, as quickly as the figure appeared, it slipped away. He swallowed hard, scanning the bleachers for any sign of danger. No one else seemed alarmed. Determined not to ruin Anaya's big night, he forced a smile and cheered louder, even as tension coiled inside him. He worried. Later, they left the gym with victorious grins. Anaya chattered about her shots, oblivious to Damien's darting glances at every parked car. The night sky seemed too still, amplifying the thunder of his heartbeat. He hated this gnawing paranoia, yet something about that hooded stranger felt more than coincidental. At home, Anaya fell asleep quickly, worn out by her efforts on the court. Damien stood by her bedroom door, listening to her steady breathing, recalling how close he'd come to losing her in court not long ago. He vowed to protect her from any unseen threat, no matter what it took. Sometime after midnight, he finally sank into bed, mind churning with half-formed scenarios. An investigator hired by old enemies, or someone with a vendetta from his military past. He had no proof, just an uneasy suspicion. But as the moonlight traced shadows on his ceiling, Damien resolved that come morning, he'd take action to uncover the truth behind those watchful eyes. Tomorrow. Damien woke at dawn on Sunday with a restlessness that refused to let him sleep in, despite desperately needing the extra hours of rest. He pulled on a sweatshirt and stepped onto the small balcony off the living room, breathing in crisp morning air. The world felt eerily calm, bathed in the gray light of early daybreak. From this vantage, he could see the street below. Just a handful of cars spaced out along the curb. None of them looked suspicious. No tinted windows, no lurking figures. Yet the hairs at the back of his neck remained prickled, the memory of that hooded stranger at the gym lingering. Just after sunrise, he slipped back inside, poured himself coffee, and turned on the local news. Absently, he watched a segment about a community festival scheduled for later in the week. Then, an unrelated story grabbed his attention. A brief mention of a missing child from a nearby neighborhood, prompting a wave of sympathy that made Damien's chest tighten. As a single father who'd nearly lost custody of his daughter, he felt a stab of empathy for any parent facing separation. Whatever threat might be eyeing him now, he wouldn't let it escalate. He decided he needed advice, maybe from someone who understood surveillance or had ties to law enforcement. His mind flashed to a friend from his military days, Brian Torres, who now worked security for a large private firm. Though they hadn't spoken in months, Brian's expertise might shed light on the suspicious cars and the hooded figure. Damien fished his phone from the coffee table and scrolled through old contacts. He found Brian's number and typed a quick text. "Need a favor. Could use your eyes on something. Strange behavior near my home. Free to talk?" He hit send, feeling an odd mix of relief and anxiety. Taking action felt empowering, yet it reminded him there might indeed be a real danger. By the time Anaya woke, yawning and rubbing sleep from her eyes, Damien had composed himself. He forced a smile. "Morning, superstar," he teased, setting out a bowl of cereal for her. "Sleep all right?" She nodded, still half dreamy as she spooned cereal into her mouth. "Yeah, still tired from that scrimmage." She paused, frowning slightly. "You look worried again. Something wrong?" Damien cursed inwardly at how attuned she was to his moods. He considered brushing it off, but Anaya was no longer a toddler he could placate with easy answers. "I'm just thinking about something at work," he fibbed, directing his gaze toward the window. "Nothing big. How about we head to the library later? You can pick out some new books while I grab a few things." Anaya's face brightened. "Sure. I've been dying to read that new fantasy series my friend mentioned." He ruffled her hair in affection, reminding himself that his daughter didn't need the burden of adult suspicion. After all, this might be a false alarm. It could be nosy neighbors or someone else with business on their block. He didn't want to instill fear in her unless absolutely necessary. They parted ways briefly. Anaya settled in the living room to read, while Damien threw on sneakers and took a brisk walk around the neighborhood. He kept an eye out for any sign of the sedans, weaving through side streets, glancing into dead-end corners. He saw nothing unusual, just a couple of early joggers and dog walkers. By the time he circled back, his phone buzzed. A reply from Brian. "Hey man, let's talk this afternoon. Call me at 3?" Damien felt an odd sense of relief. Knowing he had someone who could share professional insights eased his mind. He returned to find Anaya still on the couch, engrossed in a book about dragons, her legs tucked under her. She looked so peaceful and secure that guilt flickered through him for worrying her earlier. "Ready to go soon?" he asked. She nodded, snapping the book shut. "Yeah, let me just grab my library card." The drive downtown to the library was uneventful, the bright midday sun illuminating bustling streets. At a stoplight, Damien checked his mirrors, but saw no suspicious vehicles. By the time they pulled into the library parking lot, the tension in his chest had loosened slightly. Maybe he was overreacting. Taking a deep breath, he reminded himself that vigilance was good, but paranoia would only harm his mental health, and possibly Anaya's. They stepped into the library's hush, greeted by the faint whir of air conditioning and the comforting smell of old books. Anaya dashed off to the young adult section, while Damien wandered toward a corner table, scanning the shelves of bestsellers. In the back of his mind, he tracked the time, mindful of his call with Brian in a few hours. As he flipped through a paperback biography, he caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of his eye, someone stepping behind a tall bookshelf, abruptly out of sight. His breath caught. Was he imagining things, or was he being followed even here? For a moment he stood still, heart pounding. He listened, straining to identify any suspicious sound over the faint rustle of pages and soft footsteps. A minute passed. Nobody emerged. The library remained calm, visitors quietly browsing. Damien let out a slow exhale. It could have been anyone, just a patron looking for a book. Yet tension recoiled in his belly. He made his way to the next aisle of shelves, carefully checking each row. Nothing. No lurking figure. No sign of a hooded sweatshirt or a scarred jaw. He felt both relieved and slightly foolish. Determined not to alarm Anaya, he forced himself to stop prowling around and instead selected a book about home improvements. Their apartment could use some minor repairs, and focusing on that might calm his nerves. He found Anaya in the YA section, grinning as she clutched 2 fantasy novels. "Dad, can I check out both?" she whispered excitedly. He nodded. "Sure, knock yourself out." They checked out the books and returned to the car under clear skies. Damien scanned the parking lot with a discreet glance. Still no sign of anything unusual. He began to hope the earlier sightings were a fluke. Perhaps the world really had moved on, letting him and Anaya enjoy life without outside interference. Their next stop was a small sandwich shop for lunch. In line, Anaya chattered about wanting to grow taller so she could dominate the court. Damien laughed, relieved to indulge such normal conversation. They ate at an outdoor table, sunshine warming the back of his neck. "Dad," she asked between bites, "I know you said you're worried about work, but are you sure that's all?" She peered at him with those discerning eyes. "Because you've looked around a lot today, like you're searching for someone." Damien hesitated, meeting her gaze. The directness in her face reminded him that she was growing up, and that continuing to hide his unease might backfire. "You remember how in court I kept my head on a swivel? Checking the crowd, scanning for trouble?" She nodded slowly. "Well," he continued, "I guess I haven't completely shaken the habit. We had so many eyes on us back then. It made me cautious. That wasn't the full truth, but it was close enough." Anaya studied him, then nodded, returning to her sandwich without further challenge. They made it home by early afternoon. Damien stacked their library finds on the coffee table while Anaya disappeared into her room, likely to dive into her new novels. At 2:59, he settled onto the couch, phone in hand, waiting for 3 o'clock to strike. The exact moment the clock changed, he dialed Brian's number. After 2 rings, Brian's familiar voice answered, "Hey, long time no talk. How are you holding up?" Damien relaxed slightly, hearing the warmth of an old friend. "I'm all right, man. Listen, something's bugging me. I've noticed a car or two that seems to linger around my place at odd times, and I saw this person at my daughter's basketball scrimmage, hood up, just watching, then slipping out as soon as I got a glimpse." Brian paused, weighing the info. "Could be a coincidence, but I know you trust your gut. Tell me more." Damien described the tinted windows, the timing, the quick appearances. He left out the detail about the custody fight, figuring Brian knew the gist that Damien had full custody of his daughter. "I just can't shake the feeling I'm being watched," Damien concluded, voice tense. Brian clicked his tongue. "I've got some free time this week. What if I stop by, stake out your street for a day or two, see if anything's off? I can bring a buddy. He's ex-military, like us, does private security now." Relief flowed through Damien. "That'd be great. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I also don't want to ignore it." They arranged a plan. Brian would arrive midweek, discreetly park in the neighborhood, and observe patterns while Damien went about his normal routine. If nothing turned up, they'd both be reassured. If someone really was surveilling Damien's home, they'd figure out why. After finalizing details, they chatted briefly about old times, names of mutual friends, stories from base camp. Damien felt a pinch of nostalgia, but after they hung up, He was mostly grateful that someone had his back. With a clearer path forward, Damien went to check on Anaya, finding her sprawled on her bed, fully engrossed in a dramatic scene involving princesses and dragons. He leaned against the doorframe, appreciating how carefree she looked. He vowed that no matter what happened, he'd shield her from any threat, just as fiercely as he'd guarded her from those who wanted to take her away. That night, he cooked pasta for dinner, letting Anaya help by stirring the sauce. Steam filled the kitchen, carrying savory aromas. Over the next days, Damien strove to project calm. He added the extra detail of texting Brian updates, any parked cars that seemed out of place, any individuals loitering near the building. Sometimes there was nothing. Other times he spotted a dark sedan cruising by a bit too slowly. Brian advised him to note license plates if possible, so Damien kept a small notepad in his jacket pocket. Meanwhile, life marched on. Anaya practiced basketball after school. The grandparents invited her for another short visit, though she declined this time, claiming she had too much homework. Damien quietly breathed relief, not eager to see them while he was wrestling with this new worry. He still couldn't be sure they weren't involved, though logically it seemed unlikely. Why hire someone to watch them when they'd already lost the custody case? Whatever it was, it felt different, more distant. Perhaps something from his military days, or a new threat altogether. Each afternoon he'd glance at the plaque and the medal on the living room wall, reminding himself of the bravery he once showed under fire. This was a different battlefield, to be sure, a subtle one of waiting and watching, but it demanded the same vigilance. Anaya remained blissfully unaware, content in her daily routine, though occasionally glancing at him as if trying to decode his thoughts. When midweek arrived, Damien woke early with anticipation, knowing Brian planned to come by. He made coffee, set out an extra mug. At 7:30, he spotted an unassuming gray sedan easing onto the opposite side of the street. Through the window he glimpsed Brian's face, which broke into a slight grin. Damien waved casually from his balcony, and Brian lifted a hand in return. His friend was in position. Damien turned away from the window, conscious that the day needed to proceed as normally as possible. Anaya emerged, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Morning, Dad," she said, noticing his coffee. "Did you make extra?" He smiled, handing her a smaller cup of hot chocolate. She accepted it, content. "Let's head out. Don't want you to miss your first class." Locking the apartment door behind them, he guided Anaya down the stairs. His eyes flicked left, scanning for the mystery sedan that sometimes prowled the street. Instead, he saw Brian's gray car, tinted just enough to hide him from casual view. Damien forced himself not to wave or linger, not wanting to tip anyone off. They drove Anaya to school, her chatter filling the car. He dropped her off with a cheerful wave, pretending all was well. If everything went according to plan, Brian would text him with any observations. Damien's thoughts churned. If they caught someone in the act of surveillance, what next? In the corner of his mind lurked an even darker question. What if this person had malicious intent? Kidnapping? Revenge? He swallowed hard, determined not to let worst-case scenarios spiral out of control. By late morning, Damien was at work, fiddling with a half-assembled circuit board when his phone buzzed. He set down the soldering iron and glanced at the screen. A text from Brian. Might have something. Dark sedan circling block. Plate Chacharn partial 6C1. Damien's pulse jumped. So there was someone. The text continued. Trying to get full plate. Hang tight. Damien's breath came faster, a swirl of worry for Anaya lighting up his nerves. If there really was a car making repeated passes, it confirmed he wasn't just imagining things. He stared at the phone, waiting for more messages. For a few minutes, none arrived. He wiped his brow, returning to the circuit board with hands that trembled slightly. He had to keep calm, He was in the middle of his shift, and pacing or panicking would only raise questions. Yet a storm churned inside him, threatening the hard-won peace of his recent days. Eventually, the phone buzzed again. Lost them. Could be normal traffic. We'll stay alert. Don't worry. Easier said than done. Damien inhaled, trying to slow his racing thoughts. He pictured Anaya safe at school, pictured Brian watching the street. The plan was in motion. All he could do was trust his friend's instincts and keep living his routine as if nothing was amiss. But deep down, he knew something was. A father's intuition, or perhaps a soldier's. Either way, Damien resolved that he would be ready for whatever came next, even if it meant confronting ghosts of his past or unknown threats in the present. For Anaya's sake, and for the security he'd fought so hard to protect, he would not falter. The rest of Damien's workday passed in a tense fog. Each time his phone buzzed, he felt a stab of anticipation, expecting another update from Brian that would confirm or dispel the sense of danger lurking outside his apartment. But the texts slowed, and by late afternoon, he'd heard nothing more about the suspicious sedan. Colleagues at the engineering workshop chatted about routine tasks, oblivious to the tight coil in Damien's stomach. When the clock finally struck 5, he rushed to clear his station, nodded farewells, and headed straight to his car. Before driving home, he messaged Brian. "Any news?" The reply came a minute later. "Street quiet for now. Might swing by again tonight." Damien set the phone aside, started the engine, and tried to breathe away the anxiety. Driving through familiar streets, he caught himself checking each parked vehicle, scanning faces of pedestrians on the sidewalk. Nothing stood out. At a red light, Damien gripped the steering wheel, reminding himself that Brian was keeping watch for anything unusual. If the suspicious sedan reappeared, Brian would note the plate and follow at a safe distance. Damien exhaled slowly, urging his nerves to settle. By the time he reached Anaya's school, the afternoon sun had dipped low, bathing the campus in warm light. He parked, spotted her waiting with a basketball under one arm, and beckoned her over. She climbed in, brimming with post-practice excitement. "Coach says we have a game next week," she announced. "You'll come, right?" Damien mustered a smile. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Meant it. On the drive home, Anaya recounted practice drills, occasional missteps, and her eagerness to improve. Damien listened with half his attention, the other half locked on the rearview mirror. Each time a dark car appeared, he tensed, but they either turned off or sped away naturally. Perhaps the watchers were gone. He didn't dare relax fully, though. Brian's text had confirmed there was reason to stay alert. By the time they pulled into their parking spot, dusk was settling, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Anaya bounded upstairs, calling that she'd shower first. Damien lingered outside briefly, surveying the street in dimming light. Brian's vehicle was nowhere in sight, but Damien trusted he might be watching from a better vantage. At last he climbed the stairs, uneasy. Inside the apartment, the evening unfolded in quiet domesticity. Dinner preparations, homework checks, and hushed conversation about weekend plans. Yet beneath that routine, Damien fought a persistent worry. He texted Brian once more, asking if there were updates. Only silence followed. That wasn't too unusual. Maybe Brian was trailing someone or had stepped away from his phone. Still, every passing minute made Damien more aware of the risk of stepping outside his comfort zone. If someone truly had an agenda against him or Anaya, how far would they go? He shuddered, recalling tales of veterans who faced retribution from old enemies. That might be paranoid, but it was hard to rule out anything. After dinner, Anaya retreated to her room, content to read. Damien sipped coffee, wishing for calm certainty. Around 9, his phone finally buzzed. He snatched it up, relieved to see Brian's name. The text read, "Seen suspicious car, followed for blocks, lost them near old warehouse district. Plate partial matches earlier digits. Don't panic, but be careful." Damien stared at the message, heart pounding. The confirmation felt both validating and unsettling. Someone was indeed circling his neighborhood, apparently drifting away before Brian could see their destination. He typed back with shaky hands, "Thanks. Any clue who it might be?" Minutes crawled by before Brian responded, "No ID yet. Could be anything. Let me dig around." Damien exhaled, running a hand over his face. The sense of normalcy wavered, replaced by old instincts from his military days. Keep watch, stay ready, trust your gut, protect your own. Always. He locked every window and door, then double-checked Anaya's room, ensuring her window latch was secure. She looked up from her book, puzzled. "Dad, you okay?" He forced a casual shrug. "Just being cautious," he said, flicking the latch to demonstrate it was locked. "Go on, keep reading." She hesitated, then nodded, burying herself in the pages. In the hallway, Damien paused, wrestling with the urge to tell her everything. But what would that solve? She'd worry, maybe lose sleep, imagining worst cases. No, better to shield her. He glanced at the plaque and medal on the living room wall, drawing reassurance from them. In war zones, he learned to stand guard without letting fear paralyze him. Now, for Anaya's sake, he had to do the same. One final check done. Sleep didn't come easily. Damien lay awake, mind churning with questions. Who would target him now after all this time? The custody fight was resolved. The grandparents had seemingly backed off. The only other possibility that haunted him was a remnant of his military career. He recalled certain missions where local insurgents vowed revenge. But how could they track him here? Or was it something entirely unrelated, some criminal scheme that required observing a quiet father and daughter? That seemed unlikely, yet the mind latched onto any theory. Eventually, exhaustion pulled him under. He dreamt of swirling shadows, hearing Anaya call out for help. Jolting awake at 3, heart racing, he crept to her room and found her sleeping soundly. Relieved, he returned to bed, eyelids heavy, mind buzzing with dread. Early morning brought no new messages from Brian. Damien dressed quietly, prepared a simple breakfast for Anaya, and steeled himself for another day at work. She emerged from her room, hair mussed, eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning," she mumbled. He offered scrambled eggs and toast, wishing he could spare her from any hint of danger. After they ate, he drove her to school, scanning the rearview mirror every few blocks. Once again, nothing seemed amiss. Brian had mentioned continuing surveillance, so Damien trusted him to be thorough. Arriving at the workshop, Damien dove into tasks, trying to distract himself with circuit boards and wiring diagrams. By midday, his phone remained silent. He replayed the night's uneasy dreams, wondering how real threats could loom so invisibly, fueling dread for days. Finally, just after lunchtime, a text arrived. "Possible lead. Off shift at 2. Can drop by your place." Damien breathed out with relief, replying, "I'll be home around 5. See you then." Anxiety mixed with anticipation. If Brian had a lead, maybe they'd unravel this mystery. The rest of the day crawled, each minute overshadowed by the coming conversation. Would they discover a simple explanation? A real estate agent scoping properties? Or a private investigator for some unrelated case? Or would it be something darker? When the clock hit 4:30, Damien packed his tools, clocked out, and drove straight home. The sky hinted at rain, casting a gray pall over the city. He braced himself, wondering if life would ever feel simple again. With luck, Brian's news might bring clarity, finally. He arrived moments before Anaya's bus, So he hurried upstairs to dump his bag, then jogged back down in time to meet her at the curb. She hopped off, greeted him with a wave, and bounced into the building, announcing she needed to change for her friend's birthday gathering that evening. Damien nodded, telling her to be ready by 6. At 5:10, Brian appeared, striding up the stairs with a determined expression. Once inside, he dropped his jacket, took a seat, and fixed Damien with a serious stare. "I asked some contacts to run that partial plate. They found a match to a rental registered under a bogus name." He paused, glancing at Anaya's closed door. "This might not be random at all. We need to talk." Damien's heart sank. Brian paused, glancing again at Anaya's closed door, then lowered his voice and motioned for Damien to follow him toward the far corner of the living room. Damien's palms felt clammy as he watched his friend scan the space, clearly intent on privacy. In the yellow glow of a single lamp, Brian's expression appeared grim. "The partial plate you noted lines up with a vehicle rented 2 weeks ago under a name that doesn't match any real ID," he said quietly. "I had a buddy in the department pull what he could. The address used was a vacant property on the edge of town." Damien's heart sank. He had hoped for a simpler explanation. Maybe a neighbor's relative with sloppy paperwork. Instead, the news reeked of deeper deception. "So you're saying someone deliberately hid their identity? Any idea why?" he asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. Brian shook his head. "No clue, man. But it's enough to suggest this isn't random. Whoever's circling your block is putting effort into staying off the radar." They settled on the couch, both men leaning in so as not to alert Anaya. Damien's mind flooded with questions. Could this link to his old service days? Or was it tied to the custody ordeal, perhaps some extension of the grandparents' meddling? That seemed unlikely, though. He rubbed a hand over his face, recalling how he'd glimpsed that hooded figure at Anaya's scrimmage. "Any chance you got a look at the driver?" he asked. Brian exhaled. "Only a silhouette. Medium build, maybe. But once they realized I was trailing, they took a bunch of abrupt turns and vanished near some warehouses." A tightening coil of dread nested in Damien's gut. Memories of covert missions flitted through his mind, places where unidentified cars spelled trouble. "What do we do now?" he managed. Brian was already scrolling through something on his phone. "I can keep watching your block, but I'm also going to ask my friend in law enforcement to see if any local criminals or fixers are known to operate that way. You should think about whether you've crossed someone powerful, either recently or in the distant past." Damien swallowed hard. Over the years, he'd done his best to avoid confrontation outside of the war zone. Sure, he'd had neighbor disputes, but nothing meriting a clandestine stakeout. His military record was honorable, though he'd witnessed plenty of animosity overseas. Could it be retaliation for something that happened abroad? The idea sounded far-fetched, yet he couldn't dismiss it entirely. Another possibility nagged at him. Someone connected to the folks who once tried to sabotage his custody case. Yet the grandparents had seemed genuinely resigned and broke after losing in court. Hiring a mystery watcher didn't fit. He glanced at Anaya's bedroom door, imagining her reading peacefully while her father wrestled with invisible threats. "She can't know," Damien said. "Not yet. I don't want her living in fear. We just got past all that tension." Brian nodded in agreement. "I get it, but if things escalate, you may have to tell her something. Right now, though, let's keep your routine normal. I'll do more digging." Damien stood, pacing a few steps. The living room felt oddly claustrophobic, the shadows along the walls stretching like ominous fingers. "Should I file a police report?" he asked. Brian shrugged. Without a clear threat or more concrete evidence, the cops might not take it seriously. You can note suspicious activity, but they'll likely tell you to stay vigilant. My plan is to keep tabs for a few days. If that car shows up again, I'll see if we can capture video or get a full plate number. Then we can escalate." Damien nodded, mind whirring. The overhead light buzzed faintly as though echoing his unsettled thoughts. "Thanks, man," he said. "I owe you for this." Brian waved a hand. "You'd do the same for me. Let's just keep your family safe." Then, with a final glance at the door, he added, "If anything feels off, anything, text me right away. Don't try to confront them on your own." Minutes later, Brian left, slipping into the hallway as unobtrusively as he'd arrived. Damien locked up behind him, heart still pounding. He made a quick pass through the apartment. Kitchen, living room, windows all secure. At last, he mustered a calm expression and knocked on Anaya's door. "Ready to go soon?" he asked, voice kept light. She was halfway through braiding her hair, wearing jeans and a bright t-shirt for her friend's birthday. "Yup," she chirped. "I just need shoes." They headed out to the car. Damien's eyes flicked around the parking lot, searching for the dark sedan. Only a few vehicles sat scattered under the streetlights, none matching the partial plate. He exhaled, forcing tension from his shoulders. In normal circumstances, tonight would be carefree, dropping Anaya off at a classmate's small birthday gathering, returning later to pick her up. He wanted it to remain that way. Still, the thought of leaving her out of sight, even for a couple of hours, made his stomach knot. 15 minutes later, they arrived at a modest suburban home with balloons tied to the mailbox. A small cluster of kids could be seen through the front windows, excitedly waving at newly arriving guests. Anaya gave Damien a quick smile, hopped out, and adjusted her backpack. Before walking off, she paused. "Dad, you sure you're all right? You look like you haven't slept much." He forced a grin. "I'm fine, promise. Probably just a busy week. Go have fun, okay? I'll pick you up at 9. She lingered, gaze worried, then nodded and headed up the driveway. Only after she was safely inside did he pull away from the curb, heart pounding at the idea of her out of his immediate protection. Unable to just go home and stew, Damien drove aimlessly for a while, passing familiar roads, the shimmering lights of downtown. Eventually, he found himself near the old warehouse district Brian had mentioned. A vague sense of unease nudged him to keep driving, but curiosity overrode caution. He slowed the car along a deserted stretch, peering at rows of long-abandoned buildings. Broken windows, graffiti, corrugated metal walls, hardly a place for casual traffic. He imagined the dark sedan weaving through these streets to evade Brian, and a chill ran through him. Nothing about this area suggested an innocent detour. After a few minutes, he shook off the impulse to linger. The last thing he wanted was to be spotted snooping by the wrong person. He turned back toward the main road, keeping an eye on his mirrors. With no sign of suspicious vehicles, he eventually headed home. The minutes crawled once he arrived. He double-checked the building's front door locks, then paced the living room, phone in hand. This was how he'd spend the next few hours, restless, worried, and wishing he could freeze time until Anaya was back under his roof. At precisely 9, he pulled up in front of the birthday house, scanning the quiet suburban street. A few porch lights glowed, but no unfamiliar cars stood out. Relief unfurled in his chest when Anaya emerged, chatting animatedly with 2 other kids. She spotted him, waved, and jogged over, her cheeks slightly flushed from laughter. "It was awesome," she declared, climbing in. "We played silly games, ate pizza, and told scary stories in the backyard." Damien mustered a genuine smile. "Glad you had fun." He cast one more glance up and down the block. All clear. "Ready to head home?" She nodded, rummaging in her backpack for leftover candy. "Yeah, I'm wiped." They drove in companionable silence until Anaya asked, voice soft, "Dad, is everything okay? You've been extra jumpy." He hesitated, searching for an answer that would soothe without lying outright. "I'm just dealing with some grown-up stuff, kiddo. Nothing you need to worry about. But I'm sorry if it made you uneasy." She pressed her lips together, fiddling with a candy wrapper. "As long as you're sure." Back at the apartment, they climbed the stairs under flickering hall lights. Damien paused now and then to listen for any sounds out of place. Anaya yawned, stepped inside, and declared she was going to bed. He nodded, heart clenching with gratitude that she was safe, at least for tonight. Once she disappeared into her room, he braced himself for another long vigil. He texted Brian for an update, then busied himself by reviewing utility bills at the kitchen table. Eventually, the phone buzzed. All quiet, car never showed. Maybe they're laying low. Damien sighed, uncertain whether that was good or bad news. He typed back, "Thanks. Let me know if anything changes." Hours ticked past. The building was still, Anaya sleeping. Damien found himself perched on a dining chair, lights off, watching the faint glow of a street lamp through the window. He listened for footsteps, car engines, or anything that might signal the watcher's return. But the night wore on in a calm hush. By the time the sky began to lighten, he'd dozed off in the chair, neck stiff. He woke with a start at 5, disoriented, then realized the phone remained silent. No alerts. Everything seemed normal. Over the next few days, Brian continued his quiet surveillance, reporting only sporadic sightings. Twice a vehicle matching the partial plate cruised by, then vanished again. No direct threat emerged. Damien found himself living in limbo, an eerie half-world where daily routines played out, overshadowed by the question of who was watching and why. He brought Anaya to basketball practice, to the library, to her grandparents' brief weekend visit, all while scanning for that fleeting shape in the corner of his eye. She noticed his tension but said little. He tried to maintain the facade, praying the watchers would tire or slip up. Finally, one evening, Brian knocked at Damien's door, face set in grim lines. "Got a potential name," he announced. "It's tricky, but I tapped some old intel. Someone using an alias similar to Castillo might be renting that sedan. He's rumored to do freelance work, could be a private detective or worse, a fixer for hire." Damien's mouth went dry. A fixer for what? Brian grimaced. "Could be intimidation, evidence gathering, who knows? You step on any big toes?" Damien sank onto the couch, memories swirling. The legal battle for custody, the tension with neighbors years ago, old war-zone grudges. None seemed big enough to merit a professional. Unless he recalled seeing a name like Castillo linked to underhanded tactics in a local scandal. Then he remembered hearing rumors about powerful families using unscrupulous means to sabotage or gather dirt on opponents. The question remained, who would hire such a person to watch him now? And what did they hope to gain? A new wave of dread washed over him as he pictured Anaya's face. If someone aimed to coerce or threaten him, she would be the ultimate leverage. He forced himself to meet Brian's gaze. "I'll think hard. If I come up with anything that might be a motive, I'll tell you. In the meantime, let's keep up the watch. I won't let them near my daughter." Brian clapped him on the shoulder. "We'll get to the bottom of it, brother. Just don't do anything rash. Alert me if you see them again." That night, Damien almost told Anaya a sanitized version of events, just enough to warn her to be cautious. But the resolve evaporated when she bounded to him with excitement about her upcoming basketball game, her eyes shining with hope for a normal future. He couldn't bear to tarnish that. So he nodded, forced a smile, and decided to wait, trusting that Brian's vigilance might expose the watcher's purpose soon. In bed, he lay awake, heart hammering with protective fury. He had fought so hard for custody, only to face an unseen threat that jeopardized their peace. Gritting his teeth, he silently vowed, whoever was behind this, he would not let them break his family apart. The following week stretched into a taut balance between routine and hidden dread. Every morning Damien drove Anaya to school, determined to preserve her normalcy. But his eyes never stopped roaming for the dark sedan. He glimpsed it once, cutting a quick turn onto a side street, and again one afternoon, parked half a block away as if waiting. Each sighting stirred an upsurge of protective fury. He shared each incident with Brian, who in turn swapped terse updates about trying to track the driver's movements. But the vehicle always disappeared before Brian could intercept. Meanwhile, Anaya's life seemed brighter than ever. She chattered about her upcoming basketball game, joked with school friends, and spent evenings practicing free throws on the cracked asphalt behind their building. Damien did his best to act untroubled, but she knew him too well. Sometimes she'd pause after a successful shot, glancing over with that slight frown he recognized as concern. He forced a grin and clapped for her, heart twisting at the thought that beneath her youthful excitement, she sensed the tension that wouldn't leave his shoulders. On Wednesday, the day of Anaya's first official basketball game, Damien woke early and pored over the news, partly to distract himself, partly to see if there were any reports of odd incidents that might connect to his situation. He found nothing relevant, just stories about local politics, rising grocery prices, a string of petty thefts in a far neighborhood. No mention of a mysterious figure or a certain Castillo renting cars under false names. By the time he finished his coffee, he felt no closer to answers. He dropped Anaya at school, reminding her he would pick her up that afternoon and head straight to the gym for the game. "I'll bring your jersey and shoes, so don't worry," he said. She beamed, clutching her books. "Thanks, Dad. This is going to be awesome." He watched her dart through the school entrance, hoping her day would remain as carefree as her grin suggested. At work, he operated on autopilot, assembling a complex circuit board while his mind drifted. Several times he checked his phone for messages from Brian, but nothing arrived. Then, just before lunch, the phone vibrated. Eager, he reached for it, only to find a terse message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. RM 204 Starlight Motel, 7 p.m. His pulse spiked. There was no signature, no introduction. But the sense of threat jumped off the screen. He reread it, heart pounding. Could this be the Watchers making contact? The room number, the location. He knew the Starlight Motel sat off a less-traveled highway near the industrial zone. A place known for shady dealings, cheap rates, and flickering neon signs. This had to be a trap or some form of intimidation. Yet part of him wondered if showing up might yield the truth. Brian's warning echoed, "Don't engage on your own." Damien typed a quick reply, "Who is this?" but got no response. He forwarded the message to Brian, then spent the rest of his shift torn between curiosity and fear. If he ignored the summons, whoever lurked behind that tinted glass might escalate their methods. If he went, it might be dangerous. Regardless, he had Anaya's basketball game to attend first. Nothing would make him miss that. At 4:30, he left work and sped across town to her school, picking her up with a distracted smile. She noticed, of course, but said nothing. He handed her the gym bag containing her uniform and shoes. "Ready to show them what you've got?" he asked, keeping his tone bright. She nodded, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The drive to the gym took 20 minutes, weaving through midweek traffic and passing blocks where old row houses pressed against modern condos. Damien checked the rearview mirror regularly, but he saw no sign of the menacing sedan. He glanced at his phone once, spotting a new text from Brian. "Stay put. I'll check the motel. You go about your evening." Relief mingled with worry. If Brian confronted the Watchers alone, would that spark a confrontation? They reached the recreation center, a large, squat building with faded paint and a parking lot filled with parents, teachers, and excited kids. Anaya hopped out, brimming with eager energy. She changed quickly in a side hallway, then emerged in her bright jersey, the number 8 on her back. Spotting her teammates, she hustled away to join warm-ups, leaving Damien alone on the bleachers with other parents. He forced himself to focus on the moment. This was what he had fought so hard for, a chance to watch his daughter thrive, free from the threat of being taken. He couldn't let some shadowy figure steal that joy. As the kids took the floor, he cheered Anaya's name alongside the other parents. The squeak of sneakers and the echo of bouncing basketballs reverberated through the gym. Each time she got the ball, Damien's heart soared, forgetting everything except how proud he felt. She played well, scoring 2 baskets, though the opposing team led most of the match. Still, Anaya didn't look discouraged, hustling up and down the court with sheer determination. By the final whistle, her team had lost by a handful of points, but her grin said it didn't matter. She jogged over to him, sweaty and flushed, joy radiating from her eyes. "Dad, did you see my jump shot?" she exclaimed. He ruffled her hair. "You were amazing." Parents filtered out, congratulating their kids, some heading to celebrate over pizza. Damien glanced at the time. Nearly 6:50. That motel text weighed on him. He had no illusions about meeting at 7. He wasn't about to dash off and leave his daughter. But if Brian was heading there to investigate, perhaps the watchers would realize something was amiss. Anaya tugged his sleeve, beckoning him to see a friend who wanted to meet him. He forced a genial smile, greeting a fellow parent and praising their children's efforts. Inside, tension coiled tight. He scanned the crowd for anyone suspicious but saw only ordinary families packing up gear. Then his phone vibrated. Carefully stepping aside, he glanced at the screen. Security cams show occupant of RM-204 checked in under name J. Cooper. Going in soon. He typed back, "Be careful," fighting a surge of dread. If Brian confronted this person in the motel, it might explode into violence. Damien wanted to rush there himself, but Anaya needed him, and he'd promised Brian not to act rashly. He slid the phone away, turning to see his daughter slipping a warm-up jacket over her uniform. "Ready, Dad?" He nodded, mustering composure. "Let's head home, and maybe we'll order something nice for dinner." He dreaded the thought of returning to the apartment without answers, but for Anaya's sake, he had to keep life normal. They reached the car under the orange glow of the parking lot lamps, the sky now a dark navy. On the drive, Anaya described every highlight of the game, and Damien responded, half listening. His phone remained silent, each minute intensifying his worry over Brian's silence. By the time they reached their building, he half expected to see a police presence or worse, the dark sedan. Yet the lot was calm, with only a few cars spaced out. Upstairs, Anaya showered and changed. Damien paced the living room, phone clutched in his hand, checking it almost every minute. He forced himself to prepare dinner, simple sandwiches and salad, just to keep occupied. At 8:30, still no word. Anaya settled at the table, exclaiming how hungry she was. He tried to hide his nerves, joking about her needing more protein if she planned to outjump her opponents next time. She smiled but searched his face with curiosity. He was about to urge her to finish when the phone finally buzzed, nearly jolting him. Heart pounding, he pressed the device to his ear without checking the caller ID. "Hello?" Brian's voice came through, uneven and low. "I'm out behind the motel, found the occupant. Not good news." Damien's throat went dry. "Are you okay?" A pause. "I'm fine, but the guy's gone. Left some notes, pictures?" "Pictures?" Damien felt a chill. "Of me?" he asked, voice taut. "You, your daughter, your apartment. He had a camera with a telephoto lens. Probably been photographing you for weeks." Brian's tone suggested he was rattled. "There's also a folder with some hospital documents, names. I recognized your name on some pages." Damien's mind spun. Hospital documents? He hadn't been admitted to a hospital recently, aside from his old visits at the VA ages ago, unless it involved Anaya's birth records. That made no sense. "What do they say?" he demanded. "I haven't had time to read them all. Might be connected to the adoption or custody system. They mention Judge Whitmore in a few paragraphs, too." Damien's stomach lurched. Whitmore? Why would that judge's name appear with hospital files? He heard Brian exhale raggedly. "Listen, I had to bail when the desk clerk started poking around. Couldn't wait for the occupant to return, but I grabbed what I could. This is bigger than we thought. You need to see these. I'll meet you tomorrow, place of your choice." Damien pressed a hand to his forehead, glancing toward Anaya. She was poking at her sandwich, curiosity evident. "Okay," he said, voice hushed. "I'll text you. We'll meet somewhere safe." Brian uttered a tense agreement, then hung up. The phone call ended, leaving Damien with more questions than answers. Whitmore's name, hospital records, photos of his home. His mind reeled. "Dad?" Anaya asked tentatively. "Is something wrong?" He swallowed, trying to control his breathing. "No, sweetheart, just some work stuff." She frowned. "You're shaking." He forced a laugh that came out hollow. "Too much coffee, maybe." He ruffled her hair, heart pounding in his chest. She studied him, clearly unconvinced, then relented with a small shrug, taking another bite of her sandwich. Damien's thoughts churned like a storm, replaying each snippet of Brian's words. Watchers, hospital documents, mention of Whitmore, references to him and Anaya. A sense of déjà vu coiled in his mind, recalling the custody hearing that nearly upended their lives. Could this be linked to deeper corruption, the same undercurrent that once threatened to tear them apart? The notion seemed simultaneously outlandish and terrifying. He managed to get Anaya to bed, reading a page of her new fantasy book aloud before she drifted off. Once her soft snores filled the quiet, he retreated to the living room, flicking on a single lamp. The metal and plaque glimmered on the wall, silent reminders of old battles and new hopes. Now it seemed he was pulled into something murkier than mere custody disputes. Memories of tense moments overseas flicked through his mind. Covert operations, hidden alliances, unseen dangers. But here, in the city he called home, it felt far more personal. Exhausted but incapable of rest, he paced the apartment until well past midnight, replaying guesses about what those hospital documents might be. Possibly Anaya's birth records or something to do with her mother's side. Yet the mention of Judge Whitmore triggered an ominous sense of conspiracy. It reminded Damien of rumors he'd once heard in passing, about certain officials dabbling in illicit deals. That seemed distant from Whitmore's stony but legitimate rulings, although the judge's manner in court had always hinted at deeper prejudices. Could Whitmore be part of some broader web of corruption? The same web that funded watchers to keep tabs on Damien? The hours wore on. Around 2 a.m, he slumped onto the couch, fatigue tugging at his limbs. The city outside lay in near silence, broken only by the distant hum of a passing car. He locked the door once more, triple-checked each window, then sank into a restless doze, mind still swirling. He dreamt of the old custody hearing, except in the dream, the judge wore a hood, leaning forward with an eerie grin, brandishing photos of Anaya's entire life. Damien jolted awake in a cold sweat at dawn, heart thrashing. For a disoriented second, he expected to see that hooded figure lurking in the corner, but he was alone. Just the faint light creeping through the blinds. Another day begun. Within an hour, Anaya ambled out yawning, heading for a quick shower. Damien forced a sense of normalcy, toasting bagels, pouring juice. She chatted about how her basketball team might plan a group outing, but he barely heard. All he could think about was the mysterious folder and the possibility that his entire world had become entangled in something far bigger than a custody scuffle. At least she remained oblivious, finishing her breakfast and getting ready for school. As they were heading out, he paused in the doorway, glancing one last time at the living room. The metal and plaque seemed to glint in the morning sun, small testaments to resilience. He inhaled, remembering the vow he made when Anaya was a baby, that no matter what challenges arose, he'd face them head-on, armed with the same courage he'd shown on the battlefield. Now it seemed that courage might be tested anew. "Dad?" she prompted, waiting in the hallway. He forced a confident nod, stepping out and locking the door. "Let's go," he said softly. "Everything's gonna be fine." Damien dropped Anaya at school with the same forced cheer he'd mustered the day before, only this time his mind was consumed by Brian's discovery. Once Anaya disappeared through the doors, he sat in the car, heart pounding, a silent war raging between curiosity and caution. He needed to see those papers, the photos, the hospital documents linking his name to Judge Whitmore. Brian had texted early that morning, naming a small diner on the outskirts of town where they could talk unnoticed. In the hush of the car, Damien resolved to meet him right away. 30 minutes later, he pulled into the diner's gravel lot, scanning the ragged sign overhead. Jenny's Eats. A few pickup trucks stood out front, but no sleek sedans with tinted windows. Stepping inside, he found Brian in a corner booth, sipping coffee and cradling a worn briefcase on his lap. The diner smelled of bacon grease and old vinyl, a place forgotten by time. Damien slid into the opposite seat, nerves wound tight. Without preamble, Brian set the briefcase on the table and popped it open. Inside lay a cluster of documents and a stack of photographs secured with a rubber band. He nudged them forward. "I grabbed what I could," he said, voice hushed. "Didn't read everything, but I saw your name, plus references to Whitmore. Some mention of an old hospital settlement. Thought we'd go through it together." Damien nodded, prying off the rubber band. The first page, crisp with official letterhead, bore a date from years ago. Squinting, he saw references to infant custody placements, disputed birth records, and financial transactions. A few lines down, he spotted a mention of Carter Damien. His pulse kicked. Whatever this was, it looked serious. "Could this be about Anaya's birth?" he murmured. Brian leaned closer. "Possibly. Keep going." Damien flipped through, scanning lines about mothers being told their babies hadn't survived, hush money paid out by private agencies, and names of hospital staff suspected of misconduct. His throat went dry as he recognized certain references to attorneys who had once filed sudden motions in family court. Then a name jumped out: Whitmore. His heart hammered. The text described how certain judges allegedly fast-tracked adoptions or terminated parental rights under questionable circumstances, sometimes profiting from hush payments. He glanced at Brian, horrified. "Are they implying Whitmore took part in stealing children?" Brian's expression was grim. "It's not conclusive, but it sure looks like there was a ring of corruption. Might not be active now. Could be leftover evidence from years back, but it links Whitmore to shady hospital administrators." Damien turned to the photographs. The top ones showed him and Anaya entering their apartment, him dropping her at school, her shooting baskets at the rec center. Each image felt invasive, stolen glimpses of their day-to-day life. Beneath those were older pictures. Hospital corridors, a woman cradling a newborn, pages of forged paperwork. Damien felt sick. It was as though someone had collected evidence tying together a decades-long scheme. "Why are they watching me?" he breathed. "I never adopted Anaya. She's mine, biologically." A memory struck him of the hearing, how Whitmore had relentlessly questioned his fitness as a father, as if searching for the slightest reason to tear them apart. Could it be that Whitmore once benefited from a network trafficking infants, forging death certificates or funneling newborns to wealthy clients? And now, for some reason, watchers believed Damien threatened to expose it. Brian whispered, "Possibly they think you stumbled on something or might blow the whistle. Or maybe your fight for custody put you in contact with the wrong data. Hard to say. But they're definitely monitoring you, maybe worried you'll link Whitmore to old crimes." Damien's stomach flipped as he recalled rumors about families pressured into giving up newborns. He'd thought them urban legends. Now, seeing documents referencing hush payments and judge involvement, he realized the horrifying truth. A corrupt system once thrived in the shadows, and Whitmore's name was in the middle. He found a final page describing hush money disbursements to J. Whitmore for expedited rulings. The date was 8 years ago. That same year, Anaya was just a toddler. The shock reverberated through him. Could Whitmore have tried to funnel Anaya away if her mother had been in a vulnerable position? If so, that attempt must have failed, since Damien ended up with custody. But it meant the judge might see him as a liability, especially after the recent hearing. "Now it makes sense," Damien muttered. "He ridiculed my service, tore into my finances. He was fishing for any chance to remove Anaya from me. When he couldn't, maybe he or his associates decided to keep tabs on me." Brian's jaw tightened. "If that's true, we can't let them intimidate you. But we need real evidence that this ring still exists, or that Whitmore is still involved. This might be old news." Damien closed the briefcase, heart racing. "I can't sit on this. Children were stolen from parents, told their babies died. That's monstrous. Even if it happened in the past, the victims deserve justice. We have to blow the lid on it." Brian nodded, then glanced around the diner. "We have to be careful. If Whitmore has power, he could bury you in legal trouble or harassment. You remember how he nearly cost you your daughter. Imagine what else he could do." Damien's hands shook. "I'm done living in fear. Anaya's my top priority, yes, but if we don't expose this, who else gets hurt?" They agreed to copy everything and consult a trusted reporter Brian knew, someone with a record of investigating government corruption. But first, Damien insisted on safeguarding Anaya. They mapped out immediate steps. Brian would discreetly approach law enforcement contacts while Damien prepared a digital backup of the documents. They'd also consider protective measures for both father and daughter in case the watchers escalated. Finished, they stepped from the booth. Brian promised to circle back soon and hurried off, briefcase in hand, moving as if the building might be bugged. Damien followed minutes later, paying for a coffee he barely touched. Outside, the midday sun shone too brightly, the parking lot hot underfoot. He scanned for any suspicious car, seeing none. He spent the afternoon in a daze, each errand overshadowed by the revelations in that folder. By the time he fetched Anaya from school, the weight felt crushing. She noticed immediately, asking if everything was all right. He forced the same half-smile. "Yeah, just grown-up stuff," he repeated. It felt hollow, but she nodded, perhaps trusting he'd tell her if it was serious. Back home, Damien made a digital copy of each page with shaking fingers. The hospital records, the financial logs, the photographs of Whitmore's signature. Then he tucked the originals into a waterproof envelope, hiding them in the back of his closet. He told Anaya he was reorganizing old clothes. She offered to help, but he gently declined, wanting no risk of her seeing those damning pictures. As evening fell, the phone rang. Brian's number lit up. Damien answered, bracing for bad news. Instead, Brian spoke hurriedly. "I've got a detective friend, Ramirez. He's willing to meet if we show him the evidence. But we have to keep it secret for now. He's not sure who in the department can be trusted." Damien stared at the living room wall, at the reflection of that medal. "Tell me where and when," he said. Brian gave him an address, a safe house owned by a retired officer used for discreet investigations. "Midday tomorrow. Bring the papers." Damien's heart thundered. This was the path forward, but it bristled with danger. Whitmore and his associates, if they still wielded influence, might strike back fast. Nonetheless, the chance to protect future families from the horrors detailed in those files was worth the risk. He made dinner with shaking hands, turning over worst-case scenarios: an ambush at the safe house, crooked cops tipping Whitmore off, or the watchers forcibly silencing him. Yet every time he pictured staying quiet, he saw the faces of mothers who lost their babies, or children who might never know the truth. He refused to let fear win. That night, after Anaya slept, he paced the living room, phone clutched in one hand. He didn't text Brian further, aware they needed to minimize digital footprints. Instead, he crafted a brief letter containing the key details, printed it, and sealed it in an envelope labeled, "Open if anything happens to me." He hid it in a kitchen drawer, pinned under a dish towel. If it came to that, at least the truth would outlive him. He barely slept, and morning brought no reprieve. Heart-hammering, he dropped Anaya at school, hugging her a bit tighter, telling her he loved her. She noticed tears brimming in his eyes and grew alarmed, but he managed a quick joke about allergies. Guilt gnawed at him for concealing so much. But how could he explain a conspiracy to a child? She deserved a normal day. Just before noon, he headed to the safe house address Brian provided, a small ranch-style building on a quiet street of aging homes. The place looked unremarkable. Parking a block away, he clutched the envelope of original documents under his arm, breath unsteady. He wondered if the watchers had followed. But the road was empty save for a single parked truck. Summoning courage, he locked the car and walked briskly to the door. Brian opened it, relief washing over his features. Inside waited a middle-aged detective wearing plain clothes, presumably Ramirez. He looked earnest but wary. After introductions, Damien spread the documents on a rickety table, explaining the connections he'd gleaned: fake death certificates, suspicious payoffs, adoption irregularities, and Whitmore's signature. Ramirez's eyes widened. "This is huge," he muttered. "We've heard whispers for years, but no one had proof. If this leads where I think, Whitmore and others face felony charges: kidnapping, racketeering, conspiracy." Damien felt a jolt. Kidnapping. The word hammered home the gravity. Stolen children, devastated families. Brian added softly, "We think they've been watching Damien, maybe worried he'd piece it together." Ramirez nodded grimly. "We'll need to handle this carefully. If the judge has allies in the department, one leak could endanger you and your daughter." He pulled out a secure phone. "I'll loop in a federal contact I trust. They may open a sealed investigation. Keep the physical evidence close, but let me take digital copies." As Brian held a scanning device, Damien fought a swirl of relief and fear. This was progress, turning their private dread into official action. Yet the watchers might retaliate if they sensed the net tightening. He steeled himself. "We do what we must. Just protect Anaya," he said firmly. Ramirez agreed, finishing the scans. They parted quickly, each leaving by different exits. Damien stuffed the originals back in his envelope, gripping them like a lifeline. Outside, the day blazed bright, the sun an ironic contrast to the shadows of corruption they'd uncovered. As he strode back to his car, he sensed eyes on him, but saw no sign of the watchers. Perhaps they were biding their time. In the driver's seat, he exhaled shakily. Today would mark the beginning of a new fight. A fight to expose a conspiracy that rotted the very system meant to protect children. He checked the time. Barely an hour until Anaya's school dismissal. He'd pick her up, pretend all was normal, while behind the scenes, a storm gathered. Yet he felt a spark of righteous purpose. He started the engine, heart pounding but spirit resolute. For every stolen child, every grieving mother, for Anaya's own safety, he would see this through. No matter what, he refused to let fear dictate his life again. And if Judge Whitmore or his associates tried to crush him, they would discover that a father's love, fortified by truth, was unbreakable.